if you can get your education system right prior to implementation, it makes the driver's job easier, and it makes our job easier because we've got to literally touch every kilogram of contamination that comes into our site, and that can include needles, sharps. We've had a kitchen sink. We've had pool liners, plastic trees, plastic Christmas trees at Christmas. Our people believe that's a green. It's green waste. Well, it's green. But that's the sort of issue that, and it's year after year, and look, it gets better over time, but it's slow. If you don't get it right at the front, it takes a long time to get it right.
Hey guys, this episode of Think Beginning Not End podcast is coming to you from the beautiful city of Geelong, or in fact we're down at Moolap, and we're here to speak to Ken Dickens, the Managing Director of Corio Waste Management and Western Technology Composting. This episode is all about organics and how those recycling systems might function, what there is to learn from the failure of the curbside system as we introduce organics recycling at home.
I'm very well, Simon. How are you?
Good, thank you. Nice to see you.
You too.
All ready to go?
Absolutely.
All right, let's go, James. Let's get this episode done. Organics recycling coming up. Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of the Think Beginning Not End podcast. And today we've got Managing Director of Corio Waste Management Services and Western Technology Composting Services in Shepparton, Ken Dickens on. So great to have you on, Ken. 38 years of experience in the waste management sector.
Yes.
Some of you guys might be familiar with Ken. You might see him on Twitter, LinkedIn. He's a prominent figure here in Australia, and he has so much knowledge about organic recycling that's what we want to share with you today, is Ken's intimate knowledge about recycling organics. And Ken, you're noted for saying that waste management is a combination of art, science, and high risk. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, it's interesting. Every time I see one of our trucks roll out the front gate, I'm concerned about whether they're going to hit a car, whether somebody's going to walk in front of them. There's interaction between vehicles, heavy equipment, pedestrians, vehicles on the road. So it's important that you get your infrastructure right, you get your training right, that people understand the risks involved. And as an industry, I think sometimes we discount those risks to the detriment of the industry.
Yep. And so, Ken, you've been, like we said, 38 years in the industry. What are some of the big changes that you've noticed over that period of time? And you've travelled overseas a bit as well, and I know you take note of things that happen over there. So what are some of the big changes that you've noticed in the industry?
I think probably technology.
Yep.
I think, when we started 24 years ago, the vehicles that we drove as a startup business were nothing like the vehicles we operate today. And I think there's been a huge emphasis in occupational health and safety, driver comfort, emission standards for vehicles. We've probably got one of the youngest fleets in the industry, and we do that quite deliberately. The onboard computers, the onboard tracking systems in terms of, driving vehicles, picking up waste. Training for our employees has always been something that we're keen to keep best practice levels. And the more you train, the more safety enhancements in vehicles, like Mercedes Benz, for instance, where you've got automatic, stopping if somebody walks in front of you. When a driver spends 12 hours a day or 11 hours a day in a vehicle, they can be fatigued, and that's when accidents can happen. So we try our best to minimise or mitigate those risks.
Yep. I want to jump straight into the organic side of things, and so for people that don't know out there and our friends overseas, Ken's the managing director of a large composting facility up in Shepparton in regional Victoria. Tell us a little bit about that facility, Ken. When you built it, perhaps why you built it.
The City of Greater Shepparton went to tender back in 2006. They were quite specific about what system they wanted. They wanted world's best practice. They had a curbside, or they were introducing a curbside green waste only contract, and they wanted to ensure that they got the very best.
So Ken, just quickly for the listeners, curbside green waste contract is very different to food waste contract, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
The green waste was just garden trimmings, flowers, tree trimmings and all that sort of thing. It's fairly basic. People don't really understand the difference between what we call FOGO, which is food organics, garden organics, and just straight green waste. Green waste, in essence, is reasonably simple to compost, and when you add food to it, it becomes a totally new ball game. It becomes quite. You have to be more sophisticated. Your odour control systems have to be far more rigorous, and there's quite a difference in it. It basically changes the makeup of the material that needs to be composted. So we were the first in Victoria to commence food organics, garden organics.
Okay.
A lot said it couldn't be done within the industry, and we proved that it could. We manufacture to an Australian standard 4454. We've got a state-of-the-art facility, and the end product during non-drought times, we can hardly keep up with demand.
Yep. So digging in a bit to the facility, Ken, just to paint a picture for our listeners, the organics facility that you run up there is how big, and how many tonnes of incoming product are you allowed to take into that facility?
We're licensed for 36,000 tonne. We accept at this point in time 25,000 tonne a year. The system itself is an in-vessel system. It's based on WTT technology out of the Netherlands, and they actually operate a business in Australia now. It's since evolved. There's greater controls with newer plants, and when we build another plant, which we eventually will, those controls will be implemented in the new plant. Also, there's potential for undercover maturation. It really is a game changer in terms of composting. So
yep. And so the product comes in, and I just kind of want to work our way through this so listeners can kind of get an idea of what actually happens in here. So if you can give me a step-by-step kind of process to getting up with the finished product.
Okay, well, it starts at the home. People are given kitchen tidies for their kitchen and compostable bags.
Yep.
And there's a big difference between compostable and bio bags.
Let's come back to that after.
Okay.
Yep.
And all their food scraps are placed in the green waste bin, and you can have collection frequencies by council contractors ranging from a week to 2 weeks. And they've got various size bins. You can either have a 120 weekly or a 140 weekly to a 240 fortnightly, 240 litre that is. It's picked up curbside, delivered to us over a weighbridge. It's dropped on the ground in an undercover sorting factory, I guess you could say, or shed, more to the point. Then we go through it, and if there's serious contamination, we put it through our decontamination table, which is a trommel that's got that literally unpicks the compacted material, comes out onto a table where we've got people that pull the contamination out up a conveyor.
So Ken, just quickly, the level of compaction, does that affect the effectiveness of what happens when it goes through your site?
It can if there's glass. If there's glass contamination, and the compaction is generally 290 kilos a cubic metre, so it's fairly well compacted. But we average about 2% contamination by weight through our system. So, and most of our issues revolve around plastic bags and non-compostable plastic.
Okay.
That's a problem.
So
then it goes through the system, decontamination. 60% of our efforts are concentrated on decontaminating the material. It's a bit like data. If you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. And we work really hard at the front end to remove any contamination. It's then placed into our tunnels. Doors closed, batch number given. It's operated by SCADA. It's automatic. We rely on the SCADA to apply water and air to the 480 cubic metres in each tunnel, and that's dictated by temperature.
And can you trace that batch back to the collection run? Is it that technical yet?
No, it's not. No,
not yet.
No. It's each batch is given an identifiable number. Now, what the SCADA does is control the air and the water within the system. What happens then is the materials left in the tunnel, because we take various types of water treatment sludge from abattoirs. We do quite a bit of food waste from commercial kitchens, restaurants around Geelong, and we transport it up to Shepparton to compost. And what dictates the operation of the facility really is temperature and oxygen levels. We operate an aerobic, not an anaerobic, but a aerobic process, which requires oxygen, and it's kept in the tunnels. And the Australian standard for FOGO, or Food Organics, Garden Organics, is in vessel. It's a 6-week process, according to the standard, which is basically process driven to get a good outcome at the end. And our system controls all that, and ultimately we end up with a product. Out of that 6-week process, we tunnels for 2 weeks, bring it out and mature it for 4 weeks. Then we screen and then sell the end product to our many customers.
Yep. So temperature, oxygen. How else does it break those things down, Ken? What's really happening inside that?
The tunnels, really, that's where your capital lays, right? So your tunnels are there to allow thermophilic bacteria to get in there and essentially eat the material that's in the tunnel. Our volume is reduced a third, so they get in there. We operate at reasonably high temperatures because we prefer the certainty of pasteurisation in the tunnel, so that the finished product doesn't have any weed seeds, propagules, viruses, or anything detrimental to the product at the end of the day.
Yeah. So, okay. And the finished product that you guys make is typically used in what applications can it be used on?
Oh, look, we sell to farms. So it traditionally, really high-end quality fruit growers love our products. We've got large corporate clients in and around Shepparton, which is the food bowl of Victoria, and they can't get enough of the stuff. So
So if we go right back to the start in this real think beginning not end stuff, and we think about organics. A lot of people can be confused about these. People are confused in general about what they can put in their organics bin, and obviously we've clearly got two different types of services here. You've got just green waste, and then here in Australia they're trying to move to this FOGO, which is the food organics and green waste together. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yep. And the big driver is obviously to divert it from landfill. But to me, Ken, it sounds like organics recycling is kind of similar to plastics, that you can't have too much contamination on the front end. So this confusion.
Well, there's two really important aspects in relation to processing FOGO. The first is contamination. You know, it simply put, the most successful councils that implement this system have a long lead time in education. So they educate their ratepayers prior to the system being introduced, and the ratepayers are in no doubt as to what can and can't go into a FOGO bin.
Yep.
That's not to say that, you know, it's a perfect system. There's no such thing. But we've got councils in the northeast, central north and northeast that have contamination levels of 0.25%. But that tends to be a combination of really strong, long lead time education, and also the type of contractor that picks the material up, that they take an interest in what actually goes into their truck, and they're really enthusiastic about making the system work, and they work hand in glove with us and their council customers and the ratepayers. So, you know, if there's a consistent ratepayer or if there's a ratepayer that consistently contaminates a load, they'll either withdraw the system. They give them 3 warnings. You know, you do it again. It's after 3 warnings, they'll pull the bin out. So, you know, there's some people that are prone to use the third bin, which, you know, you've got in Victoria mainly. You've got, you know, your waste bin, general waste to landfill, recycling bin, which you understand, and you've got your FOGO bin or your green waste bin, and sometimes people can use that third bin as a rubbish bin.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Ken, what about the confusion around, you know, biodegradable bags, compostable bags? I mean, plastic person, I'm confused as anything, and then you're the person who's trying to deal with that amongst all the organic stuff that comes into your facility. What's from your perspective? What's there for people to know about that?
We did a lot of work with bag manufacturers, or compostable and bio bag manufacturers early days. We were well ahead of the game in terms of you know, what happened in Victoria several years ago. There was 3 companies at the time that saw the future of FOGO.
Yep.
They came to us and asked us to treat, or at least to put through our process, their bags, including some bio bags, compostable nappies, for instance. And we put them through our system, and we knew from that point on which would work and which wouldn't. Bio bags don't break down in our system, so they are, for all intents and purposes, a disaster for us. And what we've found happening is that when we first started with councils, we said to them we wanted councils to buy bags that were a specific colour, so we knew which council it came from, and it was distinct from a white plastic bag, for instance. So one council's got purple, the other one's got green, the other one's got a red bin. A red compostable bag. And, you know, one of the issues for us was we couldn't see what was in the bag. Right, so you didn't know until after the 14-day process what literally was in the bag, because you pull the material out and there'd be glass jars and all that sort of thing. So
it's like the old saying at the shopping centre, the recycling bin and the waste bin, and they're both in the black bag, and let's be honest, no one's, you know, knowing what's inside them either. So.
Yeah, that's correct. So, you know, we worked really hard with our council customers, and, you know, you have to have a good relationship with not only your council, because we're at the end of the process. We've got no say whatsoever about what the customer or what the ratepayer puts into our bin. You know, we are not a generator manufacturing compost. The waste is delivered to us. And it costs a lot of money to get the waste out of the system. We're responsible for the landfill cost of that in terms of contamination. So we're at the end of the road. It's up to the council to educate. It's up to the transporter that picks up the material curbside to take an interest in what they're doing. And it's hard work because, I mean, you're talking about Shepparton, for instance, the city of Greater Shepparton, 22,500 services. They do 16,000 odd a week. 11,000 odd a week. Driver, it's a mundane job. It's not an easy job, and you've got to concentrate on picking up the bin. You've got to look at when the bin's being tipped, what's actually in your hopper, and you can push a button that marks the contaminated bin. So it's not an easy job, and if you can get your education system right prior to implementation, it makes the driver's job easier. And it makes our job easier because we've got to literally touch every kilogram of contamination that comes into our site. And that can include needles, sharps. We've had a kitchen sink. We've had pool liners, plastic trees, plastic Christmas trees at Christmas. Our people believe that's a green. It's green waste. Well, it's green. But that's the sort of issue that, and it's year after year, and look, it gets better over time, but it's slow. If you don't get it right at the front, it takes a long time to get it right.
Like, to me, Ken, it seems like that is the answer to most of these problems in the recycling supply chain right now, whether that's Australia, England, America, anywhere in the world. It seems like that is the biggest area that we need to improve, and improve it fast.
Look, I think we provide recycling services, Corio Waste Management. Western Composting Technology is an innovative, European-based technology business that is doing very, very well, extremely well. The transport business is really interesting because when the shock hit, and I'm talking about industrial commercial recycling from this point, a couple of years ago, what we found was that our customers were actually angry at us because the system failed. They couldn't believe that, why can't you take it somewhere? It's, why does it have to go to landfill? Because, our supplier at the time, or the people we delivered the material to at the time, which happened to be SKM, just shut the gate on us, and literally almost shut, at that point in time, nearly shut the gate on themselves and everybody else, all their customers. So what we did was 95% of our commingled customers in the industrial commercial space was cardboard. So we said, well, look, we still there's still some value in cardboard. Just take out the commingled, so your plastics, your glass, because the cardboard recyclers didn't want plastic or glass, which is 5% of your bin, and you're still recycling the vast majority of your material. Now, the struggle, I think, for recycling now, whether it's industrial, commercial, or even curbside, is what has value today may not necessarily have value tomorrow. And cardboard is a prime example. The price of cardboard that going back 4 years ago, that recycling companies were willing to pay to subsidise the cheaper service for recycling is fallen by 90%.
So do you think we're doing a good enough job as an overall industry letting the public know that to recycle stuff, it does cost? When you look at all the steps, I put it out on a whiteboard for someone not that long ago, and I'm like, here's a bin on curbside, here's the truck that picks it up, here's the MRF that processes it, here's someone else who buys it, and someone else has to handle it, and so on and so forth. There's a big cost in all of that.
Well, what happened? Old habits die hard, and humans, we don't like change that much. When recycling started way back in the early 90s, it was Richard Pratt and Vizzy who had the vision to pick up fibre, charge for it, use it in their manufacturing process, And really, it was a win-win. You kept it out of the you kept it out of landfill, and it was used within manufacturing in Australia. What happened over time was that politicians wanted more. Landfill became a dirty word. They wanted more material out of landfill into recycling. The birth of China's recycling appetite just become ferocious.
Yep.
And they started paying really well, to the point where councils and people like ourselves could offer really cheap services because we were being rebated. All that stopped 2 years ago, as you're aware. And the price now for recycling to councils exceeds landfill price, right, at this point in time.
So that's the gate fee that they might be charged by processors.
Correct.
Exceeds landfill.
Yeah. There's councils in Melbourne that are paying $210 a tonne to have their recycled, and I'm going to put this in inverted commas, processed. In fact, there are some councils in the Geelong region that are paying $200 a tonne when you combine their gate fee plus the contamination charge. So it's far in excess of an average $125, $130 a tonne for landfill. I don't think it's sustainable as it is now. I think there's an awful lot going to landfill. In fact, I know there's a lot going to landfill. They can't, and this is the problem. You have to reinvest millions and millions and millions of dollars into a process where something might have value today. Cardboard is a prime example, where it's got very little process tomorrow. And how do you educate 100,000 ratepayers with 100,000 bins? How do you educate them that you can put something in today, but tomorrow take it out, put it in the red bin? So the challenges for the recycling industry, I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm saying the cost and the risk has to be borne by the ratepayer. It can't be passed on to the recycler anymore.
It's almost, as consumers, we need to be responsible for the stuff we buy.
Correct.
And I think where consumers have got confused is when we've been promised recycling, and in some cases it hasn't happened. And coming back to that, how do we build an education program? I think we have to be very careful, because we kind of lost a lot of public confidence in the system. And to build that education and do it properly, we need to take them on that journey a bit. And I mean, if we go back to organics, Ken, if we introduce more FOGO collection, have we got a system there ready to cope with that? Because there's a big appetite to remove it from landfill, to say we've removed it from landfill, but are we ready for it? Like, if we look at the system totally, are we ready for it?
No.
Or does it need time?
Short answer, no. Look, it's like e-waste. Victoria introduced an e-waste ban, and it's being stored in warehouses. When the recycling system was failing, there's thousands upon thousands of tonnes, probably hundreds of thousands of tonnes around Australia, that were either stuffed in 40-foot containers and stored somewhere, or in landlords' warehouses that they were paid 3 months in advance via a third party. That third party's disappeared, and the landlords are stuck with warehouses chock-a-block full of rubbish, basically. So, and it was all because nobody wanted to talk about the problem. If you can't talk about the problem, how are you going to fix it?
Yeah.
And that's a dilemma. There has to be honesty around what the issues are, and then conversation about how can we fix it. And the answer may not be what they want. It may be a combination of landfill. It may be a combination of waste to energy, although that creates problems in its own right. There'll always be landfills, and this desire to eliminate landfills or not use landfills because it's not the option that we want to use is flawed. And it's always going to be flawed because there's always going to be residual. Now, what form that residual takes, it could be inert, as in plastic, if certain plastics can't be recycled, sure, you can burn it, but down the track it may be worth something. It may not. But the reality is, if you're going to spend millions of dollars, whether it's in organics infrastructure, whether it's in waste to energy infrastructure, whether it's in improved processing so that you can remove material that does have value one day and not the next, that's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. You can't do that in a high risk environment. There has to be guarantees of support. Otherwise, the whole system, this very point in time, is broken.
So what, in your view then, Ken, who really ultimately takes responsibility for rebuilding these systems? I know, as an industry, we all want to do more, and I know government's making some statements about things, but who takes responsibility for it?
We do. So what the whole idea is to reduce the amount of waste. As I mentioned, that manufacturing facilities produce waste as part of their manufacturing process. That's one type of waste. The other type of waste is imported, used for packaging for iPhones, used for packaging for computers, the amount of packaging that is used in Australia to make something look pretty. Supermarkets have to stop demanding longer shelf lives for convenience because you're using more and more plastic in an effort to extend the shelf life of a particular product. Something as simple as cereal. Why have a cardboard box on the outside and a plastic liner on the inside? I mean, there's a million ways that waste can actually be reduced or introduced into the country, and we need that conversation, really.
Yeah, I mean, we are, for Australia, for our global audience, just to explain, we have lost a lot of manufacturing in Australia to overseas. And, when people often ask me, well, how come some plastic gets shipped to Asia or other countries? I often say to them, well, that's actually where the manufacturing's happening. So there's probably a bit of something that we need to look at in terms of what we set as standards of things that can come in.
Well, one of the biggest issues I've seen is the aggregation of contracts. Waste management groups in Victoria. It's part of Sustainability Victoria to have these waste management groups. There's one in this region, in the southeastern region, one in the northeast region. I'm talking regional here.
Yeah.
One in the Gippsland region and one in the Bendigo region that goes all the way up to Mildura. And you're talking a rather large land mass. And in an effort to drive down cost, there was a traditional thought that, well, if we aggregate all these contracts, it means higher volume, it means, lower costs. That was the traditional manufacturing thought. The paradigm was, the more you process, the cheaper the cost. Well, it doesn't work out that way. Not in recycling. The more you process, the more you're left with. The more you're left with, the higher the cost. When China first introduced, got an appetite to process this material, they take as much. 51 million tonne was delivered to China in 2016. 51 million tonne from the world, right? Then it fell off a cliff, and the virtue, and what I mentioned in a conversation previously, the governments were virtuous. We divert 80% of our material or 70% of our material. We don't know where it goes, but we divert it from landfill. Not one audit post-processing, not one audit post-delivery to Asia was ever done, because we're too busy patting ourselves on the back saying how clever we are and how virtuous we are. And all the time it was set up to fail. Nobody thought in risk management, nobody thought, and this is easy to say in hindsight, well, what if China stops? Nobody thought that.
The funny thing is, though, Ken, like there were a few warning signals there, and I know we've spoken about this off camera, but there were a few warning signals, and what I don't understand is why people didn't move fast enough, and why they couldn't see that as well.
Good question. I think what happened, again, it's human nature. They thought, well, okay, look, if we can reduce our contamination, but to go from a baling, they weren't processing, this is the problem, to go from a baling operation, a logistics operation, to literally processing with the volumes involved because of these aggregated contracts, they couldn't do it. They'd have to retool their entire MRF systems. SKM, for example, they had a transfer station in South Australia and brought all that South Australian material over here, put it on ships, off it went. When it stopped, what could they do with it? They had no infrastructure in place. The councils were really happy to get the rebates, and some of the rebates in Victoria were, the highest I'd heard of was $95 a tonne rebate to council, and councils were addicted to it.
So $95 a tonne for the curbside bin.
Yep. Unsorted.
Wow.
Absolutely. There was one, and in a Melbourne City Council, $85 a tonne. The further out in regional Victoria, the lower the rebates fell because of transport and cost associated with getting it from regional Victoria. You're talking 5-hour drive to Mildura. You're talking almost a 3 3/4 hour drive to Albury.
So let me get this right. Like even Mildura was getting a rebate.
They were getting a rebate.
And like I've driven that road myself, and it's 5 hours.
That's right.
And they were still getting a rebate.
Yeah. Could have been as low as $20 a tonne.
Yeah.
But what I'd actually attended meetings, talking to councils about organics, and the number of councillors and bureaucrats that were saying, well, we expect the organics industry to end up like our recycling industry, that we're going to get paid for the organics. And I was incredulous. I said to them, well, we're talking multi-million-dollar facilities that we have to spend or have to invest. And you expect us to pay for the material and the contamination. This is the sort of expectation that was created by China and by the operators that rebated councils. And now it's,
So, and just coming back onto that organics part of it, Ken, I mean, if we're going to roll out more of this FOGO, food and organics curbside collection, what approach do the councils need to be aware of this time round? Because if just sitting here listening, we've got lessons from the commingle bin that we probably need to learn and apply them to the organics bin.
Price. You cannot, and this may sound commercially biased.
Yep.
We have the somewhat fortunate position to be one of Victoria's longest in business. We've been doing this for 14 years, so we've been Victoria's longest processor of FOGO. We know the cost, and one of the difficult things that council have to understand is not everybody has the same level of expertise, right? Not everybody understands what's required, the amount of land needed, the actual process, because it's very easy to be sold a system by a snake oil salesman that says this technology is going to do it for you. And one thing I've learned in 14 years, technology is important, but it's not the technology that operates the system. So the technology is part of the answer, but it's how you operate that technology, whether it makes a success of the facility or not. And that's what councils have to understand. And given the fact that pricing now, as an example, in the organics industry, there was a multinational went back to the Melbourne Metropolitan Waste Management Group and wanted a 40% increase, and for all intents and purposes, they got it. And they're not in, as far as I know, they're not in breach of contract. They probably should be technically, but even then, their process isn't. You talk about the beginning to the end. They have a beginning, but they don't have an end. They don't manufacture anything. They actually ship it off site, and that's not sustainable.
And so, also for the finished product. So let me get this: how many tons a year of your finished product you're processing in Shepparton again?
25,000.
25,000, and the majority of that sold to farms.
Yes.
Do you sell that back to councils or local government?
No, it's interesting. Victoria, the Victorian state government's just about to come out with a circular economy in an effort, the circular economy they're calling it, in an effort to encourage the use of recycled material in the industry, organics industry, also in the manufacturing of material in terms of plastics.
Yep.
A certain amount. They're going to be going. I think federally they'll mandate recycling requirements in manufactured goods, which is a good start. But we don't manufacture anything here, and that's the dilemma. And now we're looking to restrict the potential export of material that can be used in manufacturing. In 14 years, not one council has purchased our compost.
Wow.
And we deal with 5 councils. We've tried.
What stops them from it? Like why? Why do you think it is?
I think what happens is that they've been doing something the same way for so long that they're loath to change. Just loath to change. They'll use topsoil where you could use compost. They'll use a mixture of sand and compost that they can perhaps buy somewhere else. We've tried to convince the benefits thereof. We've provided material for nothing, but they might complain that there's an odour in it, or and at the end of the day, we're talking about food organics waste, food organics, garden organics. It smells earthy, and it's just, but it's not soil. So it's interesting. It's just old habits. It's very difficult.
So maybe like a mechanism for them to get more involved would be looking at how they contract these contracts, and perhaps on the flip side of it is part of those contracts should be that, okay, you guys need to buy back a percentage as well, because if you're not buying it for those reasons, and say we have a drought like we've just had, then you might not be able to tap the same markets as you have been on other years.
Well, the interesting thing about our compost, it's got fantastic water retaining qualities. When we were just dealing with green waste, straight green waste, there really wasn't that much in the way of nitrogen. There was it was more or less a soil ameliorant, and because our seasons change so radically in Australia, the material changed over. It's natural, it is literally natural, and it changed over the 12-month period. An extended, a drought has caused some interesting issues in relation to the product, but it's still, with food waste, it's actually rich in nitrogen. So, not detrimental to plants, but it actually has some fertiliser quality now.
Yeah, and for our listeners that don't know a lot about that, high nitrogen level does what for
it's almost like a fertiliser. Yeah, I mean, 25,000 tonne does not. It's not enough to fertilise a 100-hectare farm.
Yeah.
If they use sort of a tonne an acre, or 5 tonne, depending on what they want to do with their soil, it's fantastic for breaking down clay. Clayey soils. There's been quite a number of businesses in Victoria that have used a lot of compost product to rehabilitate land, to grow crops, whereas you had a high salt content, very clayey soil. So it's proven. It's just that the people's perception about something that's recycled being of no value, and that happens a lot, has to change. People have to understand that ultimately you need an outlet. It's one thing to make. We manufacture. That's what we do. We manufacture a product. People have to understand, and we try really hard to convince that this is not your it's not topsoil. It adds carbon to the ground. It is of value, and it can fertilise at the same time. We had an instance many years ago where a pomegranate company, a farmer, wanted to grow pomegranate out of season in Australia to sell into the Northern Hemisphere. They were backed by the Israelis, and they used their product to add carbon in the ground, because a lot of people don't realise that Australian topsoil lacks carbon.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they needed 2% carbon
For
to
that
go
fruit to grow.
Yep. So it's an interesting business.
And what about when you add things like compostable packaging to it, Ken? I don't know a lot about it again, but I hear it doesn't really add any value to.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
No. It's the compostable packaging is only a method for householders to store their food waste until they put it in the bin.
So where we see like large stadiums swapping to compostable bamboo, wooden forks, wooden knives, it's no benefit to the product,
No.
but it's a benefit that it probably keeps it away from landfill.
Well, a lot of those don't break down.
They don't break down.
A lot. Some do, a lot don't. We've trialled every single type of material
Yep.
that is available, supposedly compostable, but it doesn't break down.
Yeah, I mean, some people talk about, in that particular sector there can be a lot of greenwashing in everything from those compostables to the biodegradable stuff.
And the biodegradable bag was a feel-good attempt to assuage the guilt of putting plastic in the landfills.
Yeah.
And the irony was that biodegradable bags needed sunlight to break down. If you're compacting 1.25 tonne per cubic metre of airspace, mate, you're not going to get much sunlight breaking that stuff down, I can tell you.
No.
No.
Ken, you've bought us a sample from Western Technology Composting, because we're not up there today. Should we just have a look at that, James?
Now this,
Yeah, sorry, bring it down. So
This-
this is your finished product, yeah?
yes. Now if you smell that, it smells sweet, doesn't it?
It does.
Now that's a combination of food organics, garden organics. It's a little bit bigger than our premium 16mm minus mix, but you put that on your garden, and I'll guarantee you there's two things you'll get. You'll get fantastic growth,
Yeah, okay.
even instant lawn. Normally you put instant lawn down on topsoil, you've got to drown the thing for at least 2 weeks.
To get it to take off.
Yep, you put this down, you dig it in, you'll use half the amount of water
Oh, wow.
and get a better result.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a combination of food and green plus water treatment sludge from an abattoir.
Yeah, wow. And the process to make this, what's the period of time again?
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Mm.
That's pretty good. Well, thanks for letting us have a look at that, Ken.
You're more than welcome.
I'd love to get up there. Obviously, you know, we spend a bit of time in that region, so I'd love to get up there with James and have a bit of a look around and yeah, obviously see this and yeah, really appreciate your time for coming on.
No, you're more than welcome to come up anytime, and thank you.
Yeah, so there you go, guys. Ken Dickens, a wealth of knowledge on organics, a wealth of experience across the entire waste management and recycling industry. Thanks very much for sharing that with us. We hope you guys got a bit of value out of that, and in understanding what happens to your green waste organics and what will potentially happen if you're going to have a FOGO collection from your home in Australia. And for our international viewers and listeners, the FOGO system is where at the household you can collect your food and other green waste organics, put it in a bin, take it to the curbside, and it gets collected, and it goes to someone like Ken, who processes it over a 6-week period and produces a great product like he's just showed us there at Western Technology Composting. So thanks again, Ken. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe and turn notifications on.
Thank you. Well done. You've done this before, mate.
A couple of times. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.